Well, welcome everybody to London Futurists. I'll just say a few words before we go on to the main topic of the day. And we've sort of taken it for granted that there will be lots of good energy available for us to do everything we want, but it's becoming increasingly clear over the last few decades that actually, unless we change how we're managing energy, we will end up in a situation when we bitterly regret our mismanagement of energy. And so more and more people rightly are asking, how can we transition from our current energy systems, which have served us well in many ways, into a sustainable energy system? And in London Futurists, we've addressed this topic 3 times now in meetings and in lots of other side discussions as well. And I have to say, many people despair at these discussions about energy. They feel it's sort of obvious what needs to be done, but we're just incapable of doing it. It's obvious that we need to move somehow to more renewable, sustainable energies, but somehow we're caught in systems of inertia, we're caught in momentum, which is difficult to change. And therefore, people say, the problem with this whole debate, it's sort of insane. And I noticed that Matthias, you mentioning in the title of your presentation, it's a plea for sanity.
Yeah.
And I would say probably the most important thing to manage, the most important thing to bring into this discussion isn't just our time and even our own energy, it's sanity. How can we escape from the prevailing dysfunctional patterns of thinking that are preventing us from seeing the options more clearly, not only as to what is possible, but how we might transition. So for all these reasons, when I heard that Matthias was available to come and talk on this with an unusual, but I think a very well considered point of view, I was very glad that he was able to come and talk to London Futurists. So I'll let him introduce himself. He's a very strong rationalist. He's very strong at focusing on real solutions as opposed to just hypothetical solutions. So I encourage you all to take a seat and get ready for a plea for sanity.
Thank you very much. Climate Zero Hour, it has arrived. So let me move over to here because I'm constantly staring into the glare. It's a little more comfortable from up here. My name is Mathijs Beckers, I'm from the Netherlands. I've been working on energy problems for about 7 years now. Started from the perspective of someone who wanted to realize a home which was fully off-grid, building solar powers, using solar heating, cutting off the gas line, and doing that. But during my calculations, I concluded that it was far more easier said than done. At first, I started expanding my calculations. I went up to a city level, then I went up to a country level, and eventually I started doing world scale calculations, and I figured, well, some figures aren't adding up. I looked at all sorts of scenarios, amongst which one of your own countries, can't recall the name, but in this country a group of lords from the House of Lords, obviously, wrote an Apollo program. So that was the first one I considered. I thought that it was far too optimistic. Then I regarded the Solutions Project by Mark C. Jacobson, a Stanford University professor, and concluded that was bollocks as well. So that was back in 2013, so that's about 5 years ago. And I wasn't really anti-nuclear then, even though Fukushima lingered in the back of my head. It just happened 2 years ago. But I thought, you know what, let's consider it, see where we get. And in the end, well, here I am, standing in front of you, trying to convince you to look further than some narratives that are available on the internet and on TV. So my main focus is climate change, naturally. I'm very worried about climate change. I say all that and, because, well, we all speak about temperature rise, we speak about sea level rise, instability, crop famine, you name it. But what you see here are the wall, I hope, stays in place. What you see here is phytoplankton. Phytoplankton is basically the bottom of the pyramid in all life on the planet. And these little creatures, they form shells. They are photosynthetic life forms, which provide about 1/3 of our oxygen supply. And they are the best way of storing carbon in the, or they are the best method of storing carbon permanently. So you all know Dover, right? The Castle of Dover, which is on top of those nice white cliffs. Well, that's these creatures, you see. That's all carbon, that's all calcium carbonate. So what happens is, because we keep emitting CO2, this CO2 at the oceans, at the sea level, at the ocean surface, goes into solution, and when it goes into solution, carbonic acid is created. So it's the stuff where our fizzy drinks come from, that's the same stuff that's carbonic acid. So these critters need carbonate ions to build their shells. They are made out of calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate. Now, if the percentage of carbonic acid goes up, so the pH goes down, these creatures find it increasingly more difficult to create these shells. And we are now at a pH of 8.1, and if we drop below a pH of 8, these creatures might stop building shells altogether. And that's something which could be disastrous, which is one of my reasons to really push the panic button and say, well, this is something we must prevent. So my focus is on phytoplankton. I could also say, well, as a humanist, because I'm a humanist, when the temperature goes up 2 degrees overall on the planet, so by the way, we in the northern hemisphere, we are already pushing 1.5 degrees at this moment. So the southern hemisphere is somewhat cooler, so they are lagging behind. But if the temperature rises too much, you get instability in crop production, water availability, and that is going to displace a huge volume of people. So if we are afraid about immigrants now and refugees now, just wait until this actually starts kicking in. And it's already kicking in, but it's getting worse. So next, we're going to look at population mechanics and energy. Now, I take my cues from Hans Rosling. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling tells us basically that curbing population growth isn't possible at this moment, but it will maximize out somewhere between 10 and 11 billion individuals. We might be lucky, maybe it will be 9.5, who knows. I have created a couple of models which go up to 9.5 billion individuals. And what we are looking at here is the result of per capita energy consumption, so per individual. And what we see is that, for instance, the US has a per capita energy consumption of 90,000 kilowatt hours per person. We here in Europe, we are about somewhere between 40 and 50,000 kilowatt hours per person. And in Africa, there are countries where there are people who have less than 10,000 kilowatt hours per person. Now, this all sounds like a lot, but that's because I'm not talking about electricity, but I'm talking about energy. So energy involves everything, from this table to the bar of soap in your bathroom, everything. So these are three of the most popular scenarios in which decarbonization is achieved, or trying to envision decarbonization. Now here we have the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund. They come up just shy of 80,000 terawatt hours. Here we have Greenpeace. They think they can do with just shy of 150 in the Solutions Project by Marcy Jacobson, which is slightly more than 110,000 terawatt hours. The EIA, which is the US Energy Information Administration, goes up to about 250,000 terawatt hours. And if I project out with the status quo, you can see, well, it's almost slightly less, but it's still more than these three here. And this is what we get if we, as the West, would cut 30% of our energy demand. So think away 1/3 of all the tables in the room and 1/3 of all the chairs and one of those bottles. You know, we start doing the stuff we are promising to do all these years but fail to do. Well, and the non-OECD countries, which is basically everything without the US, without North America, Europe, and Japan. So all the rest is the non-OECD. And you end up skyrocketing up towards 350,000 terawatt hours of primary energy. Just to give you some perspective, electricity production all over the planet is half of 50,000. It's almost 25,000 terawatt hours. So if we want to electrify everything, we should improve our electricity production by a factor of 10, just to get somewhere near here. And well, I don't like to talk about this because this is not going to provide a good future for people in the non-OECD. This is just aimed at us cutting energy, not at Africa building more energy plants, not aimed at more energy for Asians, South Americans. Forget about it. So here's the same graph again, but here I differentiate between the non-OECD and the OECD, just to give you an indication of how well they are doing. This is what we could potentially do, so we could decrease from there to there. But in the bigger picture, those 2 billion people who are coming on top of the 5.5 billion people which live in Africa, Asia, and South America, this is going to be our biggest problem. And it's our problem. It's not just their problem. Climate change doesn't know any borders. It just happens. It's a global problem. So I'm not anti-renewable. Let me preface that. I am for renewables. I think we should deploy as much solar, as much wind, as much geothermal, and as much hydro as we possibly can, within certain bounds, of course. But if you are searching for literature on why 100% renewable doesn't work, I've written my own book on it. I'm not going to put it here, but I suggest you look up those papers. They are very good. And here is here's Mark C. Jacobson. So Mark C. Jacobson has written a paper to which this is a direct response. And you see he has chosen to single out Christopher Clack, who was the main author of Clack et al. 2017, and file a lawsuit because he thought there was libel in the paper, which was obviously not true. I've read both papers. I wrote a critique on this paper. I assessed this paper. I read that paper. So what he was doing there, he was just deflecting, trying to save face, and in the end, he retracted, which was probably what his solicitor told him to do, or his barrister in the UK.
Well, we have both.
Yeah, so but his solicitor doesn't help you in the courtroom, right?
No, the barrister does that.
Okay. So in this case, it was probably his lawyer. I also want to tell you something about anti-nuclear mantras. So here are the standard arguments. I'm not going to enunciate them all, but below here you can see Peter Lang has written an excellent piece which refutes this point, as is the ETA Nuclear Cost Drivers Project Summary Report, which is written by Kirsty Gogan, who is a Brit as well. She's from Oxford, if I'm not mistaken. Needless to say, these things aren't always untrue. They are untrue to a degree. But especially nuclear means bombs. That's a thing that is pretty dear to me. Trying to make a bomb out of plutonium that comes out of a reactor is like trying to get drunk on 0.0 phony beer. It's like, I don't know which brands do you have? We have, is it Carlsberg? Do you have Carlsberg 0% or Foster Zero or?
Well, plenty of quotes alcohol-free beers, but mostly lagers.
And but they're actually alcohol-free, right?
Yeah.
It's like trying to get drunk on those. The plutonium which comes out of nuclear reactors simply is not of the grade that you could use for bombs. It's easier to enrich uranium to create bombs than to extract plutonium from nuclear reactors in order to make bombs. Unless you keep the uranium rods in the reactor for a very short period, but that would show up. It would light up the plant. Everybody would know it. So, and we have the non-proliferation treaty, so people will be watching you like a hawk. This is pretty straightforward as well. Fixing contemporary nuclear energy. I'm not opposed to light water reactors. So, for instance, well, Great Britain doesn't have a great many light water reactors. You mostly have gas-cooled reactors. They're fine as well. For instance, you're building an EPR at this moment. It's not really a cheap project. It's simply C. But I did a calculation for the total cost. So the problem with cost in terms of nuclear is the time people take to allow for depreciation, for instance. Most of the companies put it at 20 years, while the plant has an operational life of 60 years. So if you account for 60 years, then it all of a sudden starts to look pretty cheap. Well, these are all pretty obvious things, so build as big as possible is not necessarily true. I mean, I'm also a fan of small modular reactors, but if you can build a big one and you can afford it, you should, because you just saw what problems we are up against. We are going to need every big punch we can land against carbon-based fuels. So. And the biggest mistake made at Hinkley C, they didn't fix the price. So they promised you a plant which was significantly cheaper than the one you were getting. But that's because they didn't fix the price. The design wasn't finished when they started the whole project. They kept moving the goalposts, so the project got longer and longer and longer. So, which means that you need to finance all those. You need to finance all that time and all those people working on the design, and that makes it more expensive. It's really not a smart thing to do. So, I applaud the Brits for continuing with the project. We are really going to need the plant regardless of how much it's going to cost, and I understand that Wilfa B is going to be even more expensive at somewhere between 20 and 25 billion, which is a smaller plant than Hinkley C. But on the other hand, let's be fair, the Brits can carry the load. We can't expect Senegal to do this, for instance. Sounds patronizing, but you know.
No, that's reasonable.
I would rather have the Netherlands do it. I would be the one standing here. Yes, we are doing it. Where the hell are you? But you know what? I can't say that. New nuclear is actually very exciting. I am involved with one startup which is called Terrestrial Energy. They're not my bosses. They don't tell me what to say, but they curate what I write. So I have a. They have a blog, and they have me over as a guest blogger. They pay me a little money per blog, so I'm honest about that. Full disclosure. But I'm particularly interested in small modular reactors, which can still be light water reactors or solid fuel reactors. I'm fine with that. But I'm really excited about molten salt reactors. Molten salt reactors sounds like an alien concept, I don't know. But in the 1960s at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the father of practically all nuclear designs, Alvin Weinberg, came up with the molten salt reactor, which is basically table salt but then molten. It's incredibly cheap. It doesn't work like contemporary nuclear reactors. It doesn't have high pressure. It works on atmospheric pressure, but it has very high temperature, which gives us the benefit of it being able to desalinate water, help us with decarbonizing steel making, cement and concrete, and fertilizer. And then there's the versatility argument. The molten salt reactor can be configured to use the uranium which we use now today. They can also be configured as thorium breeders, and they can be configured to get rid of all that waste people keep nagging about. So it's always this issue, and mainly in politics.
High level waste.
Yeah, mainly in politics. Yeah, high level waste, of course, activities. Transhumanist. So most politicians like to make a very big problem out of nuclear waste, right? I mean, that's like the core argument of anybody who doesn't really like nuclear. It's always, what about the waste, you know? But if I would take all the waste on the planet, the nuclear waste, and I would build a pyramid of it, it would be smaller than the Empire State Building in New York, volume-wise. It's even weirder. All the uranium and all the thorium we can extract from the seas and from the earth. At this moment, if we would stack that up, it would be 2 Empire State Buildings. It's like tiny. It's really tiny. It doesn't compare in volume to, for instance, all the copper we need to electrify everything. It's like a midget and a giant. So I'm very excited about these. Yeah, this is one of those molten salt reactor designs. It's fairly simple, basically. So this is the reactor. The reactor can be built in a factory rather than constructed on site, which is regular practice now. The nice thing is this is all a contained unit, so all the radioactivity stays in here. It doesn't leave the reactor at all. It also doesn't want to leave the reactor because there's no high pressure in there. The heat exchangers are in the unit, the motors are on top of the unit, and there's a secondary heat exchanger here and a tertiary heat exchanger here. And eventually you can make steam with which you can generate electricity. Now the nice thing about the core itself is basically that it's a solid core with channels inside of it. So normally you normally have a swimming pool of water in which you lower all these fuel assemblies. You know, so normal nuclear fuel is solid. Here the fuel is a liquid, so it's being pumped around through the core and does its magic there. I don't know if any of you actually know how nuclear fission works. You too?
I'm good with it.
Roughly.
Well, I can draw it out on the board.
Is the salt corrosive to the materials?
Yes, the salt is corrosive. So what happens is, well, the corrosion isn't a problem because as long as you keep the reduction agents out, there's no corrosion, which means that you have to make sure that there's no oxygen in the system. That's all. Oxygen or water. That's a no-no. So the corrosion issues are minimal. But there's warping issues in the graphite. So the graphite soaks up some neutrons, and the graphite also soaks up some fission products. Plus it contracts, it expands and contracts continuously. So there is an issue with the structural integrity of the core, mainly of the graphite core, not so much the core unit. So right now they say, well, this has an operational lifetime of about 7 years. So what happens is after 7 years, to lift this out of the cradle, put it into a silo next to it, put a new one in, pump the fuel over, and then restart the thing. Now, they have not yet figured out how to recycle the graphite, but that's one of the core, the core issues, of course. But it's better practice than we have now, because it doesn't leave us with high-level waste, for one. And it leaves us with much less fission products, because the fission products can be extracted, especially the neutron poisons like xenon and krypton. So the burnup is higher. So normally we use about 3% of the uranium which is present in a nuclear reactor. Now that's perhaps double. It's still not a lot. But with reprocessing, which is not the same as reprocessing as we are doing now, we can basically burn everything without leaving any high-level waste. So that's pretty good.
So the graphite that we haven't figured out how to recycle, is that still a nuclear hazard, or is that kind of?
It's radioactive, yes.
Okay. And in terms of volume, is that far higher than the kind of waste you'd expect?
No, much smaller.
Okay.
Much smaller and much more manageable, because it's a solid. It doesn't go anywhere.
Oh.
It's not particularly hot, so you don't have to cool it. It doesn't want to go up in smoke, so it's basically inert. So that's great, actually. We just have to figure out how to basically crush it, filter out the fission products and the carbon-14 that is produced during operation, and then reform it into a new core. So that's ongoing research. A lot of stuff in nuclear is always ongoing research. Well, here are my strong points of nuclear. On the long run, it's pretty cheap. I think that one of those molten salt reactors may cost less than $1 billion. It's not a big unit, it's a small unit. So we're talking about 400 megawatts thermal or 190 megawatts electric. So big units are like 1,000 megawatts or a gigawatt. They come in at $5 billion, $6 billion, if they are on budget. So not like Hinkley C, which then turns out to be a lot more expensive. Well, one of the nice things, it's practically always on. The only moments it gets shut down is mostly planned maintenance. The third point is something which is very dear to me. Nuclear waste is only waste if we waste it. So we only use 3% of the fuel currently, and people are thinking about taking the 96% or the 97% that we haven't used, stick it in a barrel and throwing it into a hole into the earth. That's a cheap cop-out. It's a political thing. It's like, you know what, we don't like the research, we don't want to do that stuff. We are literally going to waste it. So the things that people are afraid of generally, which are cesium, strontium, and iodine, they actually have value. You can use iodine for cancer treatment. You can use strontium for palliative treatment if you got bone marrow or bone cancer. And cesium can be used as a heat source for a nuclear battery in space exploration. Additionally, there's a lot of fission products and isotopes in there that could be used for other space exploration or other medical uses, not medicinal. And well, this is something which gets overlooked often. It looks like the broken window fallacy, you know. Anybody know the broken window fallacy? Well, it's not that bad that we broke the window, because now somebody has to repair it, right? So it's making a good thing out of a bad thing.
Right, yeah.
So the long-term economic benefits are huge, because a nuclear power plant actually employs up to 1,000 people per plant, and power plants pay huge taxes. So that's a part of a high energy price, if the price is high, because it's all relative. And there's a crap ton of suppliers required to keep such a plant running. So the economic benefits are spread out, they are wide and they are deep. And that's something which is particularly appealing to me when we're talking about nuclear energy. Breaking the narrative. So the narrative is basically now built on what you see in most newspapers, what you see most politicians talk about. We want 100% renewables. That's our goal. But the question is that really what we should be aiming at? What is our goal? My goal is making it out of the 21st century relatively unscathed, with 10 billion people living in more prosperity than we have 7.5 billion people living now. And I believe that nuclear should be a part of that future. I don't believe that that future can be attained without it.
That's the interesting statement.
I don't think that it's going to be done without it. It's almost impossible. Yeah, I'm really passionate about this. I wrote 4 books, so these are up for grabs. If you want one, come and get one. I can sign one for you. I also have my business card here. Et c'est ça.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.